The voicemail came in at 7 minutes past midnight on the night everyone insists is about new beginnings. I remember the exact moment because I was standing barefoot in my kitchen holding a chipped mug of chamomile tea. I didn't really want watching snow slide down the dark window like it was trying to escape the city. The fireworks had already started somewhere across town. Distant booms, hollow cheers, laughter drifting up from streets I wasn't invited to. The voicemail notification buzzed. It was from my mother. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what her voice would sound like. Controlled, polite, final. The same tone she used when she told waiters their service was unacceptable, or when she explained to me calmly why I wasn't included in family decisions. I listened anyway. Claire, she said as if she were calling to cancel a lunch reservation. Your father and I talked. We think it's best if you don't come tomorrow. The holidays are stressful enough and we don't want complications. I hope you understand. Click. No anger, no apology, just exclusion dressed up as concern. I stood there for a long time after that tea cooling in my hands, listening to the city celebrate without me. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. My parents would be hosting their annual dinner in the old house in Westbrook Hills. My sister would arrive early as always with her perfect smile and expensive wine. My brother-in-law would carve the turkey. My name would never be mentioned. Again, I was 31 years old, single, financially independent, and apparently still a complication. That should have been the moment I broke. The moment I cried or screamed or begged for one last scrap of belonging. Instead, something very quiet happened inside me. I smiled, because 3 hours earlier my lawyer had called with news my family had no idea was coming. And because by this time tomorrow, everything they thought they owned would start slipping through their fingers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why that voicemail didn't break me, you need to understand how my family worked. Or rather, how it didn't. The Mercer family was respected. Not famous, not flashy. Old money adjacent. Country club money. Quiet donations to hospitals and museums. The kind of family people trusted without ever really knowing why. My father, Thomas Mercer, built a regional logistics company from the ground up, warehousing, shipping, distribution. Not glamorous, but lucrative. By the time I was in high school, his company employed hundreds. By the time I graduated college, it was worth more than most people could comfortably imagine. My mother, Evelyn, managed everything else. The image, the guest lists, the unspoken hierarchy inside our own walls. And then there was my sister. Natalie Mercer was 4 years older than me and perfect in ways that mattered to my parents. Blonde, charismatic, social, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and immediately be trusted with secrets, money, and introductions. She married well, a real estate developer named Grant, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. They lived in a house 5 minutes from my parents' place, close enough to drop by unannounced, far enough to feel independent. I was the other daughter, the quiet one. The observant one, the one who asked uncomfortable questions and preferred libraries to cocktail parties. I studied organizational psychology. I believed systems could be fair if they were built correctly. That power could be transparent. That truth mattered. My family found this adorable when I was 12, concerning when I was 22, inconvenient when I was 30. I worked for my father's company for 6 years. Not because I wanted to, but because I was told it was the right thing to do. I started in human resources, then moved into internal audits. I was good at it, too good. I noticed patterns, payroll inconsistencies, vendor favoritism, contracts routed through shell companies that somehow always benefited the same small group of people. When I brought it up, I was told not to worry. When I pushed, I was told to be loyal. When I documented, I was told I was being difficult. Natalie, meanwhile, was celebrated for her instincts, her vision, her leadership. She never worked a day in the company. She didn't need to. 3 years ago, my father announced a succession plan at Thanksgiving dinner. Not formally, just casually between dessert and coffee. Natalie and Grant will start overseeing strategic growth, he said, smiling at them like proud parents do in magazine ads. Claire will continue supporting operations. Supporting. I remember the way my fork paused midair. The way my mother squeezed my knee under the table, not as comfort, but as warning. Smile, don't embarrass us. I smiled. Later that night, Natalie cornered me in the hallway near the coat closet. She smelled like wine and victory. You're good at what you do, she said, tilting her head. But you don't see the big picture. Dad needs someone he can trust. I didn't argue, I just nodded. What I didn't tell her was that I had already started backing up files. Not because I planned revenge. Not yet. But because something in my gut told me that truth had an expiration date in that house. And when it expired, I wanted proof it had once existed. The final push came the following spring when I was quietly removed from my position. No meeting, no explanation, just a polite conversation with legal and a severance package generous enough to buy my silence if that's what I wanted. My mother called me that night. "This is for the best," she said. "You've always struggled here." Struggled. I moved into a smaller apartment across town. I found consulting work. I stopped calling. They stopped noticing. And then my grandmother died. Not my mother's mother, my father's, Ruth Mercer. The woman who built half the company's early relationships while raising 4 children and surviving a husband who never learned to listen. She used to say I reminded her of herself. At the funeral, Natalie gave the eulogy. She spoke about strength and legacy and family unity. She cried at exactly the right moments. I stood in the back unnoticed and remembered the last conversation I'd had with my grandmother. "Pay attention to paperwork," she'd whispered, her hand thin but firm around mine. "It tells the truth even when people don't." 2 weeks after the funeral, the will was read. Natalie inherited the house. Grant received a controlling interest in several properties. My parents gained expanded authority over the trust. I received a framed photograph and a letter opener. No one met my eyes. I left early and didn't look back. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I rebuilt quietly. Consulting turned into a small firm. The firm grew. Clients trusted me. I specialized in corporate compliance and internal investigations. I helped companies clean themselves up before scandals destroyed them. Ironically, I became very good at exposing the exact kind of mess my family had buried. 6 months ago, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. Subject line: "You were right." Attached was a file, then another, then another. Internal financial records from my father's company, contracts, transfers, emails I recognized. And at the bottom of the message, one line: "They're going to blame you. Get ready." That was when I hired the lawyer. That was when I stopped being invisible. And that was why, as fireworks cracked the sky outside my apartment, my mother's voicemail didn't hurt the way it used to. Because tomorrow, while they toasted tradition and pretended I didn't exist, I would be handing the truth to people who didn't care about legacy. Only facts. And karma, as my grandmother used to say, doesn't knock. It walks in like it owns the place. The first thing my lawyer said when I told him the name Mercer was, "Are you prepared for this to get ugly?" His office sat on the 3rd floor of an unremarkable brick building downtown. The kind of place you'd never notice unless you were specifically looking for it. No marble floors, no oil paintings, just clean lines, muted colors, and the faint smell of coffee that had been reheated one too many times. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I've been prepared my whole life." He studied me for a moment the way men like him do when they're deciding whether a client understands the cost of what they're asking. Then he nodded and opened the first folder. My lawyer's name was Daniel Foster, mid-50s, divorced, sharp-eyed. He had made a career out of corporate implosions and family-owned businesses that forgot laws applied to them too. He didn't flinch when I explained who my parents were or when I mentioned my sister. "What you're describing," he said carefully, "is not just favoritism. It's potential fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and possibly criminal negligence." "Possibly." I slid the flash drive across his desk. "There's more." Daniel didn't smile. He didn't dramatize it. He just plugged it in and started reading. For nearly an hour, the only sound in the room was the hum of his computer and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I watched his face change as he moved through the files. Emails between executives, vendor contracts rerouted through shell companies tied to Grant's real estate holdings, payroll discrepancies masked as consulting fees. And then there were the board meeting minutes, the ones I'd never been invited to. "They altered these," Daniel said, finally tapping the screen. "These timestamps don't match the signatures." "I know," I said. "I was the one who used to verify them." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Your family has been siphoning money out of the company for years." "Yes." "And they removed you because you noticed." "Yes." "And now," he said, folding his hands, "someone inside decided to burn it all down." I thought of the email again. "You were right. I think my grandmother knew," I said quietly. "And I think she left breadcrumbs. Someone else just decided to follow them." Daniel nodded. All right, then let's talk strategy. He didn't suggest confrontation. He didn't advise mediation. He didn't mention reconciliation or family therapy or forgiveness. He talked about timing. What happens if we file immediately, I asked. They circle the wagons, he said. They paint you as disgruntled, emotional, vindictive, a daughter with a grudge. My mother's favorite narrative. And if we wait, then we build leverage, quietly. We let them keep lying while we document it. I smiled then, really smiled. That night, I went home and opened the box I'd been pretending not to see for months. The one shoved to the back of my closet behind winter coats and old shoes. Inside were notebooks, printed emails, handwritten notes from my grandmother, copies of documents I'd never been officially allowed to keep. I sat on the floor and went through everything one page at a time. Ruth Mercer's handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, precise, unapologetic. Claire sees things clearly. Natalie doesn't like that. Grant thinks money excuses behavior. It doesn't. If anything happens to me, check the trusts. My hands shook as I read. There were dates, names, account numbers. Not complete, but enough. Enough to suggest my grandmother had known exactly what was happening long before I did, and she hadn't liked it. 3 days later, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Claire, she said, brisk as ever. We heard you've been asking questions. I pictured her in the kitchen of the Westbrook Hills house, phone pressed to her ear, eyes already hard with irritation. I work in compliance, I said. That's what I do. About the company, she continued, ignoring me. It's inappropriate. You're not involved anymore. That wasn't my choice. A pause, then a sigh carefully deployed. We gave you every opportunity. I closed my eyes. You gave me a role that didn't threaten Natalie. Her voice sharpened. You always do this. Turn everything into a competition. I didn't, I said softly. You did. The silence stretched. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted into something colder. Be very careful, she said. You're walking a dangerous line. I laughed before I could stop myself. You should hear yourself. Claire, you didn't call to ask how I was, I said. You called because you're scared. She hung up. That evening, my sister texted me. Natalie, can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed about what? Natalie, you know what? We met at a cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral ground. Public. The kind of place where people pretended not to listen. Natalie arrived 5 minutes late, flawless as ever. Cream coat, perfect hair. That smile she'd practiced since childhood. You look tired, she said, sitting down. So do you, I replied. She laughed lightly. Mom says you've been digging. Mom says a lot of things. Natalie leaned forward. Why are you doing this? I met her gaze. Because it's wrong. She blinked. That's it. That's enough. Her smile faded. You're going to destroy Dad. I tilted my head. He did that himself. You think you're the hero, she said, her voice dropping. But you're just angry because you weren't chosen. There it was, the family gospel. I was chosen, I said quietly, just not by you. She scoffed. You don't understand how things work. I understand exactly how they work, I said. That's why this scares you. Her eyes flicked around the cafe. She lowered her voice. If you keep going, she said, you won't just lose the family. You'll lose everything. I smiled. I already lost the family. She stood abruptly, chair scraping. You always did like playing the victim. I watched her leave, shoulders stiff, and felt something settle in my chest. Not sadness. Certainty. 2 weeks later, Daniel called me into his office. They moved money yesterday, he said. A lot of it. I leaned forward. Where? Offshore accounts. Badly disguised. Like they're panicking. I thought of my mother's voice. Dangerous line. They know, I said. Yes, Daniel agreed. And they're trying to get ahead of it. Good, I said. Let them. He smiled then, a small, sharp smile. Christmas Eve, he said, that's when we file. I pictured my parents' dining room. The candles. The china. Natalie at the head of the table holding court. And somewhere between dessert and coffee, the phone calls would start. I stood to leave. Daniel, I said, hand on the door. Yes. Do you believe in karma? He considered it. I believe in consequences. I nodded. That works too. The night before Christmas Eve, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous. That surprised me. I had expected shaking hands, racing thoughts, the old familiar panic that used to arrive any time my family disapproved of me. But none of that came. Instead, I felt alert, focused, like the calm before a storm you've been tracking for years and finally know how to survive. I woke before dawn and made coffee strong enough to taste bitter. Outside, the city was quiet streets, dusted with fresh snow, everything deceptively clean. I stood at the window and thought about how many Christmas mornings I had woken up in my parents' house, feeling like a guest in my own life. Always careful, always polite, always wrong somehow. Never again. At 10 that morning, Daniel sent me a single line of text. Everything is ready. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. We both knew what came next. By noon, my mother was already hosting. I knew this because one of my former coworkers still inside the company sent me a photo without commentary. The Mercer dining room fully set. 12 place settings. Gold-rimmed china. My grandmother's silver candlesticks polished to a shine. My seat had been removed. I stared at the image longer than I needed to. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed something I had finally accepted. They had erased me long before I ever fought back. At 3 in the afternoon, Daniel called. "We file in 2 hours," he said. "Once it's done, there's no undoing it." I know. There will be fallout. I know. People will take sides. They already have. He paused. "Your parents will say this is about jealousy." I smiled. They always do. Silence stretched between us. Then he said something unexpected. "For what it's worth, Claire, you're doing the right thing." I closed my eyes. "Thank you." When the call ended, I put on my coat and walked out into the cold. I didn't go anywhere meaningful. Just walked. Past storefronts glowing with holiday displays. Past couples carrying wrapped gifts. Past families rushing home with last-minute groceries. No one knew that in 2 hours a respected local empire would begin to crack. And that anonymity felt like freedom. At 5:30, I returned home. Changed into comfortable clothes. Lit a single candle on my kitchen table. Not for ambiance, but for grounding. Something solid. Something real. At 6:45, my phone buzzed. Filed. That was it. No dramatic language, no countdown. Just truth placed carefully into the hands of people paid to care about it. I poured myself a glass of wine and waited. The first call came at 7:12. My father. I let it ring. The second call came 30 seconds later. My mother. I silenced the phone. By 7:30, the text started. "What have you done? You need to fix this. This is a misunderstanding. Call us now." Natalie's message came last. "You went too far." I stared at those 3 words and felt nothing. No guilt, no fear, no urge to explain myself. I typed back one sentence. "You should talk to your lawyer." Then I turned my phone face down. At 8 o'clock, Daniel called again. "They've been served," he said. "Your father tried to call the board tried to call us. And they're panicking." I leaned back in my chair. "Good. There's more," he said. The anonymous source just sent additional documents. My heart skipped. "What kind?" "Trust documents," he said carefully. "Related to your grandmother." I sat up. "What about them?" "They don't match what was filed after her death." The candle flame flickered as if reacting to the words. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Daniel said slowly, "that the will your parents and sister relied on may not be the final version." The room felt very quiet. "My grandmother told me to check the trusts," I whispered. Daniel exhaled. "I think she suspected this. Can we prove it?" "I think we can," he said. "But it's not just corporate misconduct anymore. This is personal." I laughed softly. It always was. At 9:15, my doorbell rang. I froze. No one ever showed up unannounced. Not here, not like this. I didn't move. The bell rang again, longer this time. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Natalie. Her hair was pulled back too tightly. Her coat unbuttoned despite the cold. Her face flushed with something between anger and fear. I opened the door. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk, now." I closed the door behind her. "You shouldn't be here." She turned, eyes blazing. "You filed a lawsuit on Christmas Eve." "You excluded me from Christmas," I said evenly. "I'd say we're even." Her laugh was sharp. "You think this makes you powerful?" "I think it makes me honest." She stepped closer. "Dad is losing his mind. Mom is hysterical. The board is demanding answers." I shrugged. "They should tell the truth." Her voice dropped. "You don't understand what you've done." I looked at her carefully, really looked. For the first time, Natalie wasn't composed. The confidence was cracked, the mask slipping. "I understand exactly what I've done," I said. "I stopped protecting your lies." Her eyes darted around my apartment. "You think you're clean in this?" "Yes," she scoffed. "You worked there, you benefited." "I documented," I said. "There's a difference." She went very still. "You always were difficult," she said quietly. I smiled. "And you always underestimated me." She shook her head. "You're going to destroy the family." I met her gaze. "No, I'm just showing everyone what it really is." For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Then her face hardened. "If you keep going," she said, "I will make sure you regret it." I stepped back and opened the door. "Get out," I said. She hesitated, then walked past me, stopping just long enough to whisper, "You were never meant to win." I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, heart pounding. 10 minutes later, Daniel called again. Claire, he said, voice tight, we confirmed it. Confirmed what? There was a second trust. Your grandmother created it quietly. My breath caught, and you're the sole beneficiary. I closed my eyes. How much, I asked. Enough, he said, to explain why they panicked. I laughed then, not with joy, with understanding. My grandmother hadn't just warned me. She had prepared me. And now, as my family's Christmas dinner unraveled across town, I realized something profound. This wasn't just revenge. This was inheritance, and they had never seen it coming. I did not sleep that night, not because my mind was racing, but because something old and heavy had finally lifted, and my body didn't know what to do without it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for a call from my family to tell me who I was allowed to be. I made coffee just before sunrise and sat at my kitchen table wrapped in a sweater watching the city wake up. Somewhere across town, my parents were probably still arguing. Natalie was likely pacing, phone glued to her hand, recalculating every move she had made in the last decade. And my grandmother's quiet voice echoed in my head. Check the trusts. At 8 in the morning, Daniel called. I've been going through the documents all night, he said. Your grandmother was meticulous. That sounds like her. She created the secondary trust 6 years before she died, he continued. Completely separate from the family estate. Different firm, different executor, no overlap. So they couldn't touch it. No, he said. And more importantly, they didn't know it existed. I closed my eyes. Why me? Daniel paused. Because she trusted you. That landed harder than anything else had. Here's the thing, he added. The trust activates under specific conditions. My stomach tightened. What kind of conditions? Misconduct by primary beneficiaries. Breach of fiduciary duty. Fraud. I laughed softly. She really did see everything. She didn't just see it, Daniel said. She anticipated it. By mid-morning, the calls started again. Not from my family. From people who had never noticed me before. Former colleagues, board members, a journalist from a regional business paper asking for comment, an executive recruiter leaving a message about opportunities that suddenly felt very urgent. I ignored them all. At 10:30, my father finally sent a text. Please, just talk to me. 2 words, no accusations, no instructions. It was the first time in years he hadn't sounded like an extension of my mother. I didn't respond. Not yet. At noon, Daniel sent me a secure message. They're trying to move assets again, this time sloppier. How sloppier, I asked when I called him. They're liquidating properties, he said, selling fast. That tells me they're afraid of discovery. Too late. Yes, he agreed, very. That afternoon, my mother showed up. Not at my apartment. At my office. I had opened my consulting firm's doors early that day, more out of habit than necessity. The space was modest, but clean. Glass walls, neutral tones, no family photos, no legacy portraits. Just my name on the door. Claire Mercer Consulting. The receptionist buzzed me. Your mother is here, she said, voice hesitant. She says it's urgent. I stared at the wall for a moment, then said, send her in. Evelyn Mercer entered like she owned the place. Perfect posture. Designer coat. That look of controlled displeasure she had worn my entire life. This is where you work now, she said, glancing around. It's small. I gestured to the chair. Sit down. She didn't. What are you trying to accomplish, she asked. Accountability. She scoffed. You're tearing the family apart. No, I said calmly. I'm stopping the bleeding. Her eyes flashed. You've always been dramatic. And you've always been wrong about me. She stepped closer. You think you're smarter than all of us? I know I'm more honest. Her mouth tightened. Your sister is devastated. I met her gaze. So was I. For years. She waved a hand dismissively. That was different. Yes, I said. It was. She leaned forward. Withdraw the filing. We can talk about your future. I smiled. My future doesn't include your permission. Her voice dropped. If you don't stop this, you will be cut off permanently. I shrugged. You already did that. She stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time. You think this ends well for you? She asked. I think it ends truthfully, I said. And that's enough. She left without another word. At 4 in the afternoon, Daniel called again. They're claiming emotional distress, he said, and retaliation. Of course they are. But he continued, they can't explain the numbers. I leaned back in my chair. They never could. Also, he added, the executor of your grandmother's secondary trust wants to meet you. When? Tomorrow morning. I nodded. I'll be there. That evening, Natalie called again. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. This isn't over, she said, voice shaking. You don't get to rewrite the story. I deleted it. The next morning, I sat in a quiet conference room across from a man my grandmother had trusted more than her own children. He slid a folder toward me. Your grandmother was very clear, he said. She wanted you protected. From what? From exactly this. Inside the folder were letters, notes, contingency plans, and one handwritten line I hadn't seen before. Claire will know what to do, she always does. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I want to proceed, I said. The executor nodded, so did she. By the end of the week, the company's board had convened an emergency meeting. By the end of the month, external auditors were involved. And by the time Christmas decorations came down across the city, the Mercer name was no longer untouchable. That was when my father finally came to see me. He looked older, smaller, like a man who had spent too long pretending not to notice what was happening in his own house. I should have listened to you, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. He swallowed. Is there any way to fix this? I thought of my grandmother, of the trust, of the years of silence. Not the way you want, I said. He nodded. I thought so. As he left, I realized something important. Revenge didn't feel like rage. It felt like alignment, like stepping into a life that had been waiting for me all along. And the best part was this. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply stopped carrying other people's lies. The first headline appeared on a gray Tuesday morning, sandwiched between an article about rising mortgage rates and a fluff piece on holiday travel. Regional logistics firm under review amid internal dispute. It didn't name me. Not yet. But when I read the first paragraph, I knew exactly whose fingerprints were on every carefully chosen word. Neutral, vague, designed to suggest misunderstanding, not misconduct. A family disagreement, not a structural rot. My mother's voice translated into print. I forwarded the article to Daniel without comment. He called me 10 minutes later. They're trying to get ahead of it. Can they, I asked? No, he said flatly. But they can try to confuse people. That afternoon, my consulting firm phone rang non-stop. Some callers were polite, curious. Others were blunt. Is it true you're suing your own family? I corrected them every time. I'm not suing my family. I'm reporting misconduct. There was a difference. I made sure they heard it. The pressure came from unexpected places. A former college friend sent me a message suggesting I was being harsh. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years left a voicemail about forgiveness and grace. Grace? I almost laughed at that. On Thursday, Natalie made her move. She didn't call, she didn't text. She went public. A glossy statement appeared on the company website signed jointly by her and my father. It spoke of values, of misunderstandings, of a beloved daughter who had struggled to find her place and was now acting out of unresolved resentment. They never said my name. They didn't have to. By noon, the article had been picked up by 2 blogs. By evening, strangers were arguing about me online. I turned off my computer and went for a walk. The cold helped. It sharpened my thoughts, reminded me that this was real and happening, and not something I could simply reason my way out of. When I got home, Daniel was waiting in my inbox. We have confirmation. The auditors found inconsistencies going back 9 years. 9 years. I sank onto the couch and let that number settle. All that time, all that money, all those decisions made while I was being told to be patient, to be grateful, to stop asking questions. What happens now? I asked when I called him. Now the narrative shifts, he said. They can't hide behind family anymore. That evening I received an email from the trust executor. The assets have been transferred into your control as of this morning. I stared at the screen. Not because of the number. The number was significant, yes. But what mattered more was what it represented. My grandmother had believed me when no one else did. She had prepared for the moment when truth would need backup. And now I had resources my family didn't know how to control. I didn't celebrate. I made a list. First item, legal insulation. Second, independent audit of my own firm. Third, silence. If they wanted to paint me as emotional, I would give them nothing to work with. Natalie called that night. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. You think you're winning, she said, voice brittle. But people are already choosing sides. And it's not yours. I deleted it. The next day, Daniel sent me something unexpected. A copy of an email from my sister to a senior manager, dated 3 years ago. Claire is a liability. She notices patterns and doesn't understand discretion. We need her out before she causes damage. I stared at the words. Liability. I forwarded it back to Daniel. Can we use this? Oh yes, he said, we can. By the end of the week, the board announced Natalie and my father were stepping back pending investigation. The press called it temporary. I called it overdue. My mother didn't call me anymore. She sent letters, handwritten, carefully worded, full of disappointment and warnings about reputations and irreversible damage. I didn't respond. Instead, I met with a financial advisor recommended by the trust executor. A woman my grandmother had worked with quietly for years. She wanted you to have options, the woman said, not obligations. I nodded. That sounds like her. You could walk away from all of this, she continued. Start over somewhere else. I thought about it. Then I shook my head. No, I'm not running. I'm finishing. That night my father showed up again. This time he didn't ask to fix things. He asked to understand. I didn't know how bad it was, he said, sitting stiffly on my couch. You didn't want to, I replied. He winced. Maybe. Silence stretched between us. I'm scared, he admitted. So was I said. For years. He nodded slowly. What do you want? The question surprised me. I want the truth documented, I said. I want accountability, and then I want space. He swallowed. From us. Yes. He stood to leave, shoulders heavy. At the door he paused. Your grandmother would be proud. I believed him. As January edged closer, the story grew. Audits, reviews, resignations. And quietly beneath it all, something else happened. People started calling me brave. Not dramatic, not bitter. Brave! For the first time in my life, the word didn't feel like an accusation. It felt earned. And as my family's carefully curated image began to crack under the weight of its own lies, I understood something fundamental. Revenge wasn't about watching them fall. It was about standing still while the truth did the work. And the truth, once given room, never needed permission. The call came on a Monday morning, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before you even answer. Claire Daniels said, skipping pleasantries, "We have a problem and an opportunity." I closed my laptop slowly. I don't like sentences that start that way. He exhaled. Natalie hired a crisis firm. Very aggressive, very expensive. Of course she did. They're not just spinning, he continued. They're digging into you. I waited. They're claiming you manipulated data while you worked there, that you created false trails to justify retaliation. I laughed, once sharp and humorless. She's accusing me of doing exactly what she did. Yes, Daniel said. Classic projection. But here's the opportunity. In order to make that claim, they submitted documents. My heart skipped. What kind of documents? Internal files, emails, audit drafts that were never meant to leave the company. And some of them contradict their own public statements. I closed my eyes. She panicked. She panicked, Daniel agreed. And she overreached. The next 48 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Daniel's team worked through the night. Independent forensic analysts compared versions of documents, tracked metadata, reconstructed timelines. Patterns emerged quickly. Natalie hadn't just approved questionable transactions. She had altered reports after the fact, changed language, removed objections, signed off on summaries that directly contradicted raw data. And then there were the emails. Not instructions, not outright confessions. Worse, jokes. Move it before Claire notices. She's not as loyal as you think. She'd rather be right than rich. I stared at the screen, a strange mix of validation and grief tightening my chest. They had known exactly what they were doing, and they had known exactly why they needed me gone. On Wednesday, Daniel called again. The regulators wanted to talk to you, he said. When? Tomorrow. I didn't hesitate. I'll be there. The building was modern and impersonal, all glass and steel and quiet authority. 2 investigators sat across from me in a small conference room, their expressions neutral but attentive. They didn't accuse, they asked. What did you notice? When did you notice it? Who dismissed your concerns? I answered calmly. Precisely. No emotion, no embellishment. At one point, one of them paused and said, "You documented all of this while you were still employed." Yes. Why? I thought for a moment. Because I knew I wouldn't be believed later. They exchanged a glance. When I left the building, the air felt lighter. Not because it was over, but because the truth was no longer mine alone to carry. That afternoon, Natalie tried again. This time she sent Grant. My brother-in-law showed up at my office with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and a coffee I hadn't asked for. "Claire," he said warmly. "Can we talk?" I gestured to the chair. "You're already here." He sat leaning forward like a man used to closing deals. "You know this is spiraling," he said. "It doesn't have to." I raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "Natalie is willing to step back," he said. Quietly. "We can settle. Make this go away." I laughed. "You think this is about positions?" "It's about survival," he replied. "No," I said calmly. "It's about consequences." His smile faded. "You don't have to burn everything down." "I'm not," I said. I stopped feeding the fire. Big difference. He leaned closer. "Name your price." I stood. "Get out." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." "This is family," he snapped. "No," I said quietly. "This is business, and you're bad at it." He left without another word. By Friday, the second headline hit. Audit reveals discrepancies in Mercer Logistics leadership. This one named names. My father resigned that afternoon. Natalie released a statement blaming poor oversight and stress. No apology, no accountability, just distance. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with a glass of wine I didn't finish, staring at the city lights. I thought I would feel victorious. I didn't. I felt hollow, not because I missed them, because I was finally grieving what I had never really had, a family that protected its own. On Saturday morning, I visited my grandmother's grave. The ground was frozen, the headstone dusted with snow. I brushed it away gently and stood there, hands tucked into my coat. "You knew," I whispered, "didn't you?" The wind moved through the trees like an answer. I told her everything. The audit, the emails, Natalie's desperation, my father's resignation. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "I'm just done." For the first time since all of this began, I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just tears, quiet and honest, finally aloud. When I left the cemetery, my phone buzzed. "Daniel. They're opening a formal investigation," he said, "full scope." I closed my eyes. "Thank you." "There's one more thing," he added. "Your sister tried to access the secondary trust." I laughed softly. "Of course she did." "She can't," he said, "but the attempt is documented." "Good. Let the record show exactly who she was." That night I went home and made a decision. I wasn't going to hide. On Monday morning I agreed to one interview. Just one. Not to attack, not to defend, to explain. I sat across from a reporter who looked surprised by my calm. "Why now?" she asked. "Because silence protects the wrong people," I said. "Do you hate your family?" she pressed. I shook my head. "No, I outgrew them." The article ran the following week. It didn't sensationalize, it didn't speculate. It laid out facts. And something unexpected happened. Women started writing to me. Long emails, short messages, stories that sounded painfully familiar. Sisters favored, daughters dismissed, truth punished. "Thank you for saying it out loud. I thought I was crazy. I wish I had documented everything like you did." I realized then that this wasn't just my reckoning. It was a mirror. And Natalie, whether she understood it yet or not, had already lost more than her position. She had lost the story. And once the story belongs to the truth, there is no buying it back. The first subpoena arrived on a Thursday. Thick envelope. Official seal. My name typed with the kind of precision that makes everything suddenly feel real in a way headlines never quite do. I didn't panic. That surprised me. I called Daniel, read it aloud, then placed it neatly into the growing file on my desk labeled simply Timeline. "That's normal," he said. "It means they're serious." "Good," I replied. "I'm tired of half measures." The second subpoena arrived the following Monday. The third 2 days later. By then, the Mercer logistics offices were practically bleeding investigators. Employees whispered. Executives avoided eye contact. Vendors delayed invoices. Longtime partners suddenly remembered scheduling conflicts. Fear has a smell. I recognized it. Natalie, meanwhile, went silent. No statements, no social media, no carefully worded denials. That worried me more than her public outrage ever had. People like my sister did not retreat unless they were planning something. I found out what it was on a rainy Wednesday afternoon when Daniel walked into my office unannounced. He rarely did that. "They're offering a settlement," he said, closing the door behind him. I looked up slowly. "Who is they?" "Your parents, Natalie, Grant, all of them." I leaned back. "Already. They want this over before it goes criminal," he said, "before charges are filed." "And what do they want in return?" He hesitated. "Your silence." I laughed, not cruelly, almost fondly. "They still don't understand," I said. Daniel slid a document across my desk. "They're offering money. A lot of it." "I already have money." "They're offering to restore your reputation." "My reputation is fine." "They're offering reconciliation," he finished quietly. That one almost made me angry. "I don't want dinner invitations," I said. "I want accountability." Daniel nodded. "That's what I told them." "Good." But he added, "They're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes." "What kind?" He tapped the folder. Natalie signed off on the settlement draft. And she acknowledged responsibility. I sat very still. "In writing?" I asked. "Yes." I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. "That's not a settlement," I said. "That's a confession." Daniel smiled. "Exactly." 2 days later, the investigation widened. What had begun as financial irregularities became something else entirely. Witnesses came forward. Former employees spoke up. Vendors produced emails they had been told to delete. Patterns became narratives. Narratives became evidence. My father was called in for questioning. Natalie was asked to submit devices. Grant retained separate counsel. My mother stopped sending letters. Instead, she left a voicemail. "Claire," she said, voice strained, no longer polished. "You've made your point. Please, this is enough." I listened once, then deleted it. Enough was never what they had offered me. That weekend, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Margaret Lewis. She had worked under me in internal audit. Quiet, meticulous, fired the same week I was removed. We crossed paths at a grocery store of all places. She froze when she saw me, then smiled tentatively. "I'm glad it was you," she said. "What was me?" I asked. "The one who said something," she replied. "I thought I was imagining things." I shook my head. "You weren't." She swallowed. "They made me feel like I was unstable." "They're good at that," I said. She hesitated, then leaned closer. "I kept copies too." I stared at her. "Of what?" "Everything I could," she said, "just in case." My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Daniel," I answered. "You won't believe this," he said. "Another former employee just came forward." I smiled slowly. "Yes, you will." That night, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about power. Real power didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It waited. And when it finally moved, it brought company. The following week, Natalie resurfaced. She didn't call me. She went on television. A soft focus interview, carefully lit, neutral background. The narrative of a woman overwhelmed by responsibility and betrayed by her own sister. "Claire has always struggled," she said gently. "She doesn't see how much damage this is doing." I watched the clip once, then closed the laptop. Daniel called 10 minutes later, voice amused. "She just contradicted herself." "How?" "She claimed ignorance of transactions she personally signed." I laughed. "Of course she did." "That interview," he continued, "we're entering it into evidence." I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. The next morning, I received an email from the executor of my grandmother's trust. A single line. "She would be proud of how you're handling this." I stared at it longer than I meant to. Pride had been a rare currency in my childhood, always conditional, always withheld. This felt different, earned. As winter dragged on, the Mercer name continued to erode. Contracts were suspended. Clients walked. The board dissolved. And then finally the call came. "Claire," Daniel said. "They're referring it to the district attorney." I closed my eyes. "Criminal?" I asked. "Yes." I felt something unexpected then. Not triumph. Relief. That night my father called one last time. His voice sounded tired, smaller than I remembered. "I should have stopped her," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I was afraid," he admitted. "I know." A long pause. "I hope someday you can forgive us." I thought about my grandmother. About documentation. About silence. "Forgiveness isn't a prerequisite for truth," I said gently. "But it might come later." After the call ended, I stood by my window and watched snow fall in slow, steady sheets. Natalie had once told me I was never meant to win. She was right. This wasn't winning. Winning implies a game. This was something else entirely. This was the end of an illusion. And the beginning of a life that didn't require permission. The indictment didn't arrive with drama. No flashing lights, no reporters at my door, no cinematic knock in the middle of the night. It arrived as a PDF attachment at 6:42 on a quiet Tuesday morning, flagged urgent by Daniel. I opened it alone at my kitchen table, sunlight barely touching the edge of the counter, coffee untouched beside my laptop. State of New York versus Natalie Mercer et al. Et al. That phrase did more damage than any headline ever could. I read every page slowly. Not because I needed to understand it, but because I needed to feel it. The language was clinical, precise, unemotional. Financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, obstruction, conspiracy. There it was, my family's legacy reduced to bullet points and statutes. I closed the document and sat back. I felt nothing. That worried me for a moment until I realized something important. This was not the moment I had been waiting for. The waiting had ended long ago. By the time the news broke publicly later that afternoon, I was already 3 steps past it. Daniel called just after noon. "They're arresting Natalie tomorrow morning." "Grant too?" "Yes." "My parents?" "Not yet. Cooperation buys time." I nodded. It always does. There was a pause. "Are you okay?" I considered the question honestly. "I'm steady." "That's better than okay," he said. The media reaction was swift and predictable. Shock, disbelief, speculation, retrospectives about a once respected family empire undone by internal betrayal. They still framed it as betrayal. I let them. If people needed a villain, they could borrow the old narrative a little longer. Truth didn't need everyone's agreement to remain true. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number. It was my mother. I recognized the cadence immediately, even without her name attached. "Please don't let them take her away in handcuffs. She's still your sister." I stared at the screen. For years, that sentence would have crushed me, triggered guilt, made me fold myself smaller to preserve peace that never really existed. Now it simply felt inaccurate. I typed one response. She made choices, so did I. Then I blocked the number. The next morning, I didn't watch the arrest footage. I didn't need to. Instead, I went to work. Not consulting work, not legal strategy. Real work. I had been postponing a decision for months, telling myself I would address it when everything settled. But something in me understood that waiting was just another form of fear. I called the executive director of a nonprofit I had volunteered with years ago, quietly, anonymously. "I'm ready to fund the program," I said, fully. There was silence on the other end. Then disbelief. Then gratitude. It felt good, grounding, like planting something new in soil that had finally been cleared. At 11, Daniel called again. "Natalie wants to see you." I laughed softly. "Of course she does. She asked through counsel," he said. "They're requesting a private meeting." I stood at my window watching traffic move below, people rushing, living, unaware. "Do I have to?" I asked. "No," he said immediately, "and I don't recommend it." I thought for a moment, "But I want to." He hesitated. "Why?" "Because I don't want her last memory of me to be a headline," I said. "I want it to be the truth." The meeting took place in a small conference room at the detention center. Neutral, gray, stripped of all pretense. Natalie looked different. Not ruined, not broken, just smaller. Her hair was pulled back without care. Her suit was gone, replaced by something generic. She looked like someone who had lost the ability to control the room. When she saw me, her eyes filled. "I never thought you'd actually do it," she said. I sat across from her. "I never thought you'd stop me." She laughed weakly. "I always knew you were smart. I just didn't think you were strong." I tilted my head. "You taught me to be." Her mouth trembled. "You could still help me." I said nothing. "They'll listen to you," she insisted. "You always were the reasonable one." That word again. Reasonable, the family euphemism for compliant. "You don't want help," I said calmly. "You want rescue." Her face hardened. "You enjoyed this." "No," I replied. "I survived it." Silence fell between us. "I didn't hate you," she said suddenly. "I was afraid of you." I nodded. "I know." She looked at me, then really looked. "What happens now?" she asked. "You face what you did," I said, "and I go live my life." She swallowed. "Do you feel better?" I thought about it. "No," I said, "I feel finished." That seemed to confuse her. The guard opened the door a moment later. Time was up. As I stood to leave, Natalie spoke again. "They always loved you less," she said, bitterness creeping back in. That never changed. I turned at the door. "They loved what they could control," I said. "That was never me." I didn't look back. Outside, the air felt cold and clean, like winter trying to make room for something else. Daniel called that evening. "How did it go?" "It ended," I said. He exhaled. "Good." The following weeks passed strangely quietly. My parents retreated from public view. The company formally dissolved. Assets were seized or frozen. Investigations expanded outward, touching people who had once felt untouchable. And me, I slept. I ate. I laughed with friends who had stood by me without asking for explanations. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't bracing for impact. One night, as I sorted through old boxes preparing to move apartments, I found a letter I had forgotten. My grandmother's handwriting. Inside one final line, "Some families teach you who to be, others teach you who you are not." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk. Natalie had lost everything she thought made her powerful. I had gained something far more durable, myself. And as the world moved on hungry for the next scandal, the next downfall, I understood something deeply and without bitterness. Justice doesn't roar, it settles. And once it does, there is room to breathe again. The silence after everything collapsed was louder than the chaos that came before it. For weeks, my phone had been a living thing in my hands, buzzing, ringing, demanding. Then one morning, I woke up and realized no one needed anything from me anymore. No statements, no affidavits, no emergency calls from Daniel. Just quiet. I didn't trust it at first. I kept waiting for the next wave, the next accusation, the next attempt to rewrite history. When you grow up in a family like mine, peace always feels like a setup. But days passed, then weeks, and the quiet stayed. That was when the grief arrived. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that knocks you over in public places. This grief was slow and domestic. It showed up while I was folding laundry, while I was grocery shopping, while I stood in line for coffee and realized I had no one left to disappoint. I had spent my whole life being shaped in opposition, trying to prove something, trying not to be something. Now there was nothing to push against. The first crack came when I received the box. It was delivered to my office with no return address, plain cardboard, no note, just my name written in careful block letters. I didn't open it right away. I carried it home, set it on my kitchen table, and stared at it for a full hour before touching the tape. Something in my chest tightened as I cut it open. Inside were photographs, old ones. My parents in their early years smiling in a way I barely recognized. Natalie as a toddler, crooked bangs and gap-toothed grin. Me as a baby held awkwardly by my father, my tiny hand wrapped around his finger. At the bottom of the box was a single envelope, from Dad. I sat down before opening it. Claire, I don't know how to be your father in a world where I no longer get to decide the rules. I should have learned sooner. I should have protected you when it mattered. I can't undo what I allowed. I can only stop pretending it wasn't my responsibility. I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know this. I see you now. And I am sorry it took losing everything for me to learn how. If you ever want to talk, I'll wait. Dad. I read the letter twice, then a third time. I didn't cry. I placed it back in the envelope and set it in my desk drawer next to my grandmother's letter. Not as an answer, as an acknowledgement. Some apologies come too late to fix anything, but not too late to tell the truth. The next call I made surprised even me. It was to my mother's sister, my Aunt Ruth. The one who used to slip me books under the table at family gatherings. The one who never married, never had children, and was quietly treated like an afterthought. She answered on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call, she said. I didn't know if I should, I admitted. She laughed softly. You come from a family that confuses obedience with love. It takes time to unlearn that. We met for lunch the following week. She didn't defend my parents. She didn't condemn them either. She just listened. I left that house the moment I realized it would cost me my voice, she said, stirring her tea. You stayed longer than I did. I thought if I was good enough they'd see me. She met my eyes. They saw you. That was the problem. That stayed with me. As winter began to loosen its grip, my life shifted in subtle ways. I moved apartments, not because I needed to, but because I wanted a space that didn't hold echoes of waiting. I donated furniture, bought plants, let sunlight dictate where things went. I stopped introducing myself as someone who had survived something. I just introduced myself. Work changed too. My consulting firm grew, but I refused certain clients, ones who wanted quiet cover-ups, ones who asked me how to make something go away. I don't make things disappear, I told them. I make them honest. Some walked away. Others leaned in. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by my office without a file in his hand for the first time. Just checking in, he said. You've been quiet. I'm practicing peace, I replied. He smiled. You're good at it. Don't spread that around, I said. It ruins my reputation. He hesitated. Your sister's case will likely go to trial. I nodded. I know. You may be called again. I'll show up. He studied me. You're different. I stopped explaining myself, I said. It saves time. That night I dreamed of my grandmother. She was in her kitchen, the old one with the yellow tiles and the window that faced the garden. She was humming softly, hands dusted with flour, completely unbothered by my presence. You did fine, she said without turning around. I was scared, I told her. She smiled. Courage is fear that kept going. I woke up with tears on my pillow and something like warmth in my chest. In early spring, I received a final notice. The secondary trust had fully vested. No more contingencies, no more oversight. What my grandmother had protected was now undeniably mine. I didn't feel rich. I felt anchored. I made one large decision and several small ones. I funded scholarships for women studying compliance and ethics, quietly. No plaques, no press. I expanded the nonprofit program I had backed earlier, and I took my first real vacation in years. Not somewhere impressive, just a small coastal town where no one knew my last name and no one cared. One evening, walking along the shore phone left behind, I realized something had shifted. I was no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. The story was over. Not because everyone had apologized, not because everything had been made right, but because I no longer needed the ending to justify the beginning. My family had taught me what power looked like when it was afraid. My grandmother taught me what it looked like when it was patient. And I had learned something else entirely. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the absence of self-betrayal. And for the first time, standing alone by the water, as the sun disappeared, I knew I had finally stopped betraying myself. The trial date was set for late summer. I marked it on my calendar, then closed the app and didn't look at it again for weeks. That surprised people. Daniel mentioned it gently one afternoon when we were reviewing unrelated contracts. Most clients count down the days. I already lived it, I said. The courtroom is just paperwork catching up. Still, when the subpoena arrived confirming my testimony, my hands trembled for the first time in months. Not from fear of Natalie, from fear of being seen again. The courthouse was older than the scandal. Stone steps worn smooth by generations of people who had come there believing truth could be sorted if everyone stayed in their seats and spoke when spoken to. I arrived early, sat alone, watched lawyers shuffle papers and reporters pretend not to stare. Natalie entered 15 minutes later. She didn't look at me. Her hair was shorter now, her suit conservative, almost apologetic. She looked like someone trying to blend into a world that no longer welcomed her. For a moment I felt something close to sorrow. Then I remembered the emails, the jokes, the ease with which she had erased me. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Facts were laid out. Numbers, dates, signatures. When it was my turn to testify, the courtroom seemed to narrow, like the walls had leaned in to listen. I told the truth. Not theatrically, not angrily, just clearly. I explained my role, my concerns, the documentation, the retaliation. I answered questions without embellishment, without apology. Natalie's attorney tried to frame me as emotional, suggested I had misinterpreted intent. I met his gaze steadily. Intent doesn't change outcomes, I said. Only accountability does. There was a murmur in the room. When Natalie's attorney asked why I hadn't gone to my family first, I paused. Because when truth threatens comfort, I said families like mine protect comfort. Natalie looked at me then. Really looked. And for a brief moment, I saw something like recognition. Not remorse. Recognition. Afterward, Daniel squeezed my shoulder. You were solid. I nodded. I know. Outside, reporters swarmed. I answered one question. Do you feel vindicated? I considered it. I feel accurate. Then I walked away. The verdict came 3 weeks later. Guilty on multiple counts. No dramatic gasps, no cheering. Just consequences finally formalized. Natalie was taken into custody quietly. No cameras allowed inside. Grant received a plea deal. My parents were fined heavily and barred from corporate governance for life. The Mercer name became a case study. I received dozens of messages, some congratulatory, some accusatory, some confused. I ignored most of them. The only message I answered came from my Aunt Ruth. Proud of you. Not for what you did, for how you did it. That felt like enough. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a strange shift. People listened differently. Not because I was louder, because I no longer asked permission to speak. At a conference panel on corporate ethics, a woman in the audience raised her hand. How do you survive exposing powerful people when they're family? I thought about my grandmother, about documentation, about silence. You stop confusing survival with shrinking, I said, and you build a life that doesn't depend on their approval. After the panel, she hugged me, hard, like someone letting go of something heavy. That night, I went home and opened my father's letter again. This time I wrote back, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just truth. I am open to a conversation. Slowly, with boundaries, if you can accept that I won't protect lies anymore. He responded 2 days later, I understand, I will wait. We met once that fall, in a quiet cafe far from familiar places. He didn't ask me to fix anything. He didn't defend my mother. He just listened. It wasn't closure, but it was honest. As summer turned into autumn, my life settled into a rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar in its simplicity. Work I believed in, people who chose me without conditions, a home that didn't echo with judgment. One evening while organizing old files, I found the first notebook I had ever used at the company. Yellowed pages, meticulous handwriting. On the inside cover, a quote I had written years ago and forgotten. Integrity is what remains when approval leaves. I smiled. That younger version of me had known more than I realized. I placed the notebook beside my grandmother's letters and closed the drawer. The story everyone else told about my family would fade eventually, replaced by newer scandals, louder failures. But the story I lived with was quieter and truer. I hadn't won. I had returned to myself. And that I was learning was the only victory that ever lasts. After the verdict, people expected a victory lap. They expected interviews, speeches, a visible transformation from wronged daughter to triumphant woman. That was the story arc they understood. Suffering rewarded, justice crowned. What they didn't expect was my disappearance. Not dramatic, not absolute, just a quiet step sideways out of the noise. I took a leave from my firm, handed daily operations to my second-in-command, turned off notifications I had once treated like oxygen. For the first time since my early 20s, I let days pass without proving anything to anyone. The stillness felt unfamiliar, at times unsettling. When you grow up in a family where love is conditional, chaos becomes a language. You learn to read moods the way other people read weather. You learn to brace, to anticipate, to manage. Silence feels dangerous because it usually means something is about to be taken away. So when nothing happened, I waited for it. It took weeks before my body understood what my mind already knew. The danger was over. I rented a small house near the water a few hours from the city. Nothing luxurious. Just wood floors, big windows, and the sound of waves that didn't care who my family was or what I had survived. Mornings there were simple. Coffee, a walk, a notebook I used for thoughts that didn't need witnesses. It was in that quiet that the anger finally found its way out. Not explosive anger, not rage. The deep kind, the kind that asks questions. Why did it take so long for me to trust myself? Why did I accept being minimized as the cost of belonging? Why did I confuse endurance with virtue? One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes I had brought with me, I found something unexpected. A birthday card. From my mother. It was from my 25th birthday, the year I had been passed over for a promotion at the company in favor of an external hire Natalie recommended. I remembered that day. The way my mother had smiled too brightly. The way she told me I was being sensitive. The card was brief. So proud of the woman you're becoming. Just remember to be patient. Everything comes in time. I stared at the words. They weren't cruel. They were worse. They were dismissive, gentle, reasonable. A lullaby meant to keep me asleep. I tore the card in half and felt something release in my chest. Not hatred, clarity. Later that week, my father called. I almost didn't answer. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't afraid of his voice anymore. "How are you?" he asked. "Quiet," I said. "In a good way." He hesitated. "Your mother won't speak to me." I didn't respond. "She blames you," he continued. "She says you humiliated her." I told the truth, I said evenly. What she did with it was her choice. He sighed. "I know." That was new. Not agreement, but acknowledgement. "I've been thinking about your grandmother," he said. "About the things she used to say." "Like what?" "That silence isn't the same as peace," he replied. I closed my eyes. "She tried to tell me," he continued. I didn't listen. "No," I said gently. "You didn't." There was a pause. "I'm trying now," he said. "I see that," I replied, and I meant it. We spoke for another 10 minutes. About nothing important. About the weather. About the town where I was staying. When the call ended, I didn't feel drained. I felt neutral. That was progress. The next visitor surprised me. My Aunt Ruth drove up one Saturday afternoon with a basket of food and a smile that carried no expectations. "I thought you might forget to eat," she said. We sat on the porch and talked as the sun dipped low. She told me stories about my grandmother I had never heard, about fights, about laughter, about decisions that didn't look brave at the time but changed everything later. "She chose differently than your parents," Ruth said. "That's why they never forgave her." "I think she forgave them anyway," I replied. Ruth nodded. "That was her gift. You don't have to inherit it." I smiled. "I won't." As autumn deepened, invitations began arriving. Panels, boards, committees, people who wanted my story, my perspective, my endorsement. I declined most of them. Not because I was hiding, because I was choosing. I accepted one invitation that mattered. A small gathering of women who worked in compliance, audit, and governance. No press, no cameras, just a room and a shared understanding of how often truth is punished when it's inconvenient. One woman spoke up near the end. "My sister works at my company," she said, voice shaking. "And everyone assumes she's more capable because she's louder. I feel like I'm disappearing." The room went quiet. I met her eyes. "Document everything I said. Not because you plan to fight, but because you deserve proof of your own reality." She nodded slowly, tears gathering. Afterward, as people filtered out, I stood alone for a moment, hands resting on the back of a chair. This was the legacy I wanted. Not fame. Not validation. Translation. That winter, I began writing again. Not statements, not testimony. Stories. Not for publication, not yet. Just to map the emotional terrain I had crossed. To name things I had never been allowed to name. Favoritism is abuse with good manners. Silence is not neutrality, it is participation. Love that requires erasure is not love. I wrote until the words stopped hurting. On the last night of the year, I returned to the city. Not to celebrate, to mark. I stood on my balcony as midnight approached, watching fireworks bloom and fade. A year earlier, I had been bracing for fallout, waiting for permission to exist. This year, I felt grounded. My phone buzzed with messages. From colleagues, from friends, from strangers who had found courage in my refusal to disappear. One message stood out. From my father. "I am proud of you. Not for what you endured, for what you chose." I read it once, then set the phone down. As the clock struck midnight, I didn't make a wish. I made a promise. I would never again confuse proximity with belonging. Never again confuse silence with safety. Never again confuse endurance with love. The hardest part was over. But the most meaningful work was just beginning, and this time it would be done on my terms. The morning after New Year's Day, I woke before sunrise without an alarm. For the first time in years, there was nothing urgent waiting for me. No deadline, no damage control, no family crisis disguised as responsibility. Just a quiet apartment and a sky slowly lightening over the city. I made coffee and stood by the window watching the streets come back to life. Someone jogged past in a bright jacket. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Ordinary things continuing without any awareness of the war that had ended inside me. That was when it finally sank in. I was free. Not the dramatic kind of freedom people write speeches about. Not the kind that comes with applause or vindication. The quiet kind. The kind where you realize no one gets to rewrite your reality anymore. A week later, I closed my firm's office for an afternoon and invited the team to lunch. No speeches, no announcements, just gratitude. At the end, my second-in-command lingered behind. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "When all this started, I was afraid you'd burn out or disappear." I smiled. "Me too." "But you didn't," she continued. "You changed the rules instead." I thought about that on my walk home. Changing the rules had never been my goal. I just stopped agreeing to the ones that erased me. That distinction mattered. In February, the final legal matters wrapped quietly. No more appeals, no more statements. Natalie's sentence was finalized. Grant faded from public view. My parents sold the house in Westbrook Hills. The Mercer name became something people spoke about in the past tense. I didn't attend the last hearing. I didn't need to. Closure doesn't require witnesses. My father and I met a few more times that spring. Carefully, respectfully, with boundaries that stayed intact even when emotions tried to push past them. My mother never reached out. That used to hurt. Now it simply informed me. Some people would rather protect the story they tell about themselves than repair the damage they caused. I stopped trying to be the exception. Instead, I built something new. Not a company, not a movement. A life. I redecorated my apartment, slowly choosing things because I liked them, not because they made sense to anyone else. I hosted dinners where no one competed for attention. I took long walks without my phone and learned how to be bored again. Boredom turned out to be a luxury. One afternoon, while organizing a shelf, I found my grandmother's letters again. I sat on the floor and reread them all in one sitting. She never told me to be brave. She never told me to fight. She told me to pay attention to patterns, to inconsistencies, to the way people behaved when they thought no one was watching. She had given me the most powerful inheritance of all: trust yourself. That spring, I accepted a role on the advisory board of an organization focused on ethical leadership. Not because I needed another title, but because the conversations mattered. At the first meeting, a man asked me, "Do you think transparency actually works?" I looked around the table. "It doesn't prevent harm," I said, "but it limits how long harm can hide." He nodded thoughtfully. That felt like enough. As summer approached, I took another trip to the coast. The same town as before, the same quiet house. On my last night there, I sat on the beach wrapped in a blanket, listening to the waves roll in and out like steady breathing. I thought about the woman I had been 2 years earlier, the one who apologized before speaking, the one who documented quietly because she knew she would be doubted, the one who believed survival meant staying small. I wished I could tell her something. Not that it would all work out. Not that justice would come. Just this: you are not imagining it. You are not too much. And you are not alone even when it feels like you are. The truth does not always reward you quickly. Sometimes it takes everything first. But it never forgets you. When I returned home, I began writing again, this time with intention. Not to expose, not to defend. To tell stories like mine. Stories that don't end with reconciliation but with self-respect. Stories where the reward isn't being chosen by people who hurt you, but choosing yourself anyway. On the last page of my notebook, I wrote one final line. I did not lose my family. I lost the illusion that they could love me without control. And that loss saved my life. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to say this directly to you. If you are sitting in a family that dismisses you, a workplace that gaslights you, a relationship that requires your silence, you are not weak for wanting peace. But peace that costs your integrity is not peace. Document what you see. Protect your truth. Build a life that does not depend on being believed by people who benefit from your doubt. And if you ever have to choose between being included and being honest, choose honesty. Every time. This is where my story ends. Not with revenge, with return. If this story resonated with you, If it made you feel seen or less alone, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Like this video if Claire's journey meant something to you. And in the comments, I'd love to know, have you ever had to walk away from a family or system to protect your truth? Your story matters too. Thank you for listening.